I think we should give it another minute or two before we start.
Yes, I agree. Karsten, I'm looking at the GitHub. The latest draft is November 10th. So today, okay.
So, Glenn, while we're waiting, there is a pull request to create a tools.md. Do you maybe want to merge that?
Okay, I'll take a look. Thank you. So is this a pull request against the main repo?
I see no open pull requests.
Yeah, I don't see it either. So wait a minute. Probably
Okay.
I simply didn't create the actual pull request. Yep. That explains it. Number 135 now.
Okay,
This
thanks.
is not changing the document at all. It's just saving some information from an issue into a separate Markdown file.
Yeah, looks good to me. I'll merge that.
Thank you.
So
Cool.
where is it? Okay, I'll take your word for it.
Shall we start
Okay.
now? And I presume that Stefan will join us at some point.
Yeah, he said 10 to 15 minutes late.
Yeah, I mean, we'll spend the first bit of that just getting through the usual administravia.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so I can do the formal introduction as I always do. So this is the JSON Path Working Group for IETF112. The usual disclaimer, as this is an IETF meeting, the no-12 applies, and all the BCPs and guidance that you see stated here applies to this meeting as well. If you have any questions, you can ask the Ombuds team, or you can also ask Francesca, who is quietly sitting in the background there. Probably a good idea. Carsten, are you able to take notes when you're not speaking, or is there somebody else who could help volunteer?
I think it would be much better if somebody else would work on that. So I'll sure pitch in, but I'm afraid I'm going to speak a lot today.
Okay, that's fine. I guess what we can do then is what we've done in the past, which is I'll crank out some notes from the VOD when it's uploaded a little bit later. The blue sheets
using the shared notes in the CodeMD, and that's where I will be typing into.
Yep. Okay, and then I can just sort of add in anything else that needs to be needed, including that you missed. That's fine. Blue sheets are automatic because we're using Meet Echo this time. I will try and do my best to keep an eye on the chat in case anybody needs to pipe up. And but if somebody could nudge me, that would be, if I miss anything, that would be kind of helpful. Do we have any agenda bashing that needs to be done? The agenda is this.
Perhaps we need to discuss regex in filters again, because I'm a bit unclear about the direction.
Yep. Tim and I had discussed that as a potential thing, and maybe if we have time for that, after I guess Carsten's gone through the issues, we can include it.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Cool.
I think we can actually. I think let's try and
Would
do
you-
that, because I think that that's a fairly short item based on our discussion last time. I mean,
Do you want to do it now then?
well, let me just offer the following. Sure, if people don't mind, it can take a minute. Is that at our last get together, we had a consensus that we can't really have regexes unless we describe what we mean by regexes, and there at that time was nothing very concrete. You know, Carsten had scratched out a proposal. So you know, as things stand now, we're probably not going to have regexes and filter expressions unless somebody's willing to do a bunch of work that I haven't heard about.
Yeah, I have a slide on that.
Okay, well, let's push that on the stack then and dive into the issues.
Okay. So I guess the format of today's meeting is that, Tim, did you want to cover your editorial notes and the things that you the various sections of the document on list and go through those to start with, and then we pick up Carsten's issues? Cool. Did you want to share a screen, or did you want me to bring up the email?
If you could just bring up the email. I'm
Sure,
having trouble finding my own damn email. I may have accidentally nuked it somehow. Here it is. Okay, I got it. It's in the. I'll drop the URL into the chat just to be sure.
Oh,
So
wow.
anyhow,
Yep.
So anyhow, having read the draft, I came away actually fairly cheered up, because the draft isn't terrible. You know, the important parts that, you know, describe the syntax and the semantics are, you know, I thought mostly pretty okay, with editorial notes to be added, and then a huge number of our open issues are all stuck down in section 4, the expression language. Carsten, you've done a round since this, and everybody's looked at this, I think. What in here needs further discussion? Carsten? Anybody else?
So in preparing this meeting, I actually tried to tackle the big things here. I haven't tackled all the small things because, yeah, they are, in the end, they are not so small with the amount of editing that is required. But I think some of these should probably go into issues, so we can have a little bit more discussion about them, and some of them are really editorial, and we need another editorial round. So basically, I think I'll get back to this mail after this meeting, but I think most of it is done at this point.
Okay, okay, fair. That's good. The one thing I wanted to raise here is in the section 3.5. I can't find it in my own notes. The section that has all the different 3581. I was hoping we would have examples. Do people agree with that in spirit, that for each of the selectors,
There are several ways to do examples. There is one issue, if I remember correctly, that asks for an appendix with examples. And I think that's a pretty good objective, to have an appendix that has at least one example for each component of the syntax, and hopefully of the semantics by that as well.
that's right. I found it in section 3.5.2, which particularly under dot selector. Oh yeah, so dot selector, dot wildcard, all these things in 3.5, right? There's a root selector, dot wildcard, index wildcard. I don't know. I just, when I read a spec, I find it so much happier if I read each piece of little descriptive prose and then an example of what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. The only danger in putting examples in early is it sometimes tricks people into not actually defining the content in a normative way.
Fair enough. Yeah. But in most cases, we already have pretty well, right? So
yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to leave that in as a suggestion to the editors, and I might actually go and do a PR myself on that if nobody else is interested. But I just want to make sure nobody objects to that. Okay, so having said that, it sounds like the people at least on the call here have a somewhat shared view of the state of the spec and what we need to do to get finished. Let's talk about schedules a little bit, if nobody objects. How much work do we have left here? I'm going to say not that much, and we could think seriously about bringing a draft forward to the ISG at the next IETF.
Yeah, I think that's probably doable. Just to be clear, I'm not currently working on the compliance test suite or the reference implementation. So I think we're talking about just having the draft available in that time frame.
Well, Glenn, did you go get a serious job or something?
No, I got involved in some other things outside this, so I got a bit distracted. Since Marco dropped out, I lost my main compatriot on those aspects. Quite like bouncing off people and rather than doing a solo effort.
Okay, fair enough. So I just wanted to share my opinions there on the state of the draft and what needs to be done. That's fine. Okay, I'm done with that. Shall we? We had a couple of issues queued up. James, back to you.
Yeah, sorry, I've just been struggling to share the screen and trying to triage it with Meet Echo. I've started it again. Yeah, we're not off to a good start with the technology this time around. I'll let Carsten do the screen driving now, and you can do your talking, Carsten.
Yeah, thank you. So I was just in the middle of opening an issue for the inline examples. Okay, so that's not going to be on my slide yet, number 136. feel free to fill in that issue. So what I did is I went through the issues newest first and tried to find out where we are with these issues. That has turned out to be difficult for about 5 of them, because they are really just streams of consciousness, brain dumps, and it's not even clear that the well-defined issue is defined there. Let's talk about them at the end. So let me talk about the ones where I think I understand what they're about. And the most recent one was 127 when I started doing these slides. And the question was, should we provide for structured types in containable? So for the in operator, we would need to do 2 things to allow that. We would have to put in a value notation for structured types, and we would need to define the comparison semantics for structured types. So right now the value notation is limited to primitive types, and actually it's different in the various places where we need it. So that's maybe one thing where we can think about whether it should be possible to search for true or false in a containable and so on. So that's one thing we would need to fill in. And that's not entirely trivial. We cannot just copy the JSON syntax, because JSON path has a more lenient syntax, so we at least have to patch that a little bit. And of course, an interesting question, once you actually have array and object constructors in your value notation, what can you actually construct them from? Can you only construct them from literals, or can you also construct them from results of nested queries? And well, I would say if we do all this, then we probably also should allow path and constructors. But maybe we should first find out whether we actually want to do this. On the comparison semantics, I think that's pretty obvious. It's not the semantics defined by JavaScript, but it would be a deep recursion to define equality. And yeah, in 120, or in the interim 2 months ago, we said we really just want array literals composed of primitive values. So the existence of this issue seems to tell me that we are reconsidering this, and I'd like to hear where we should go with this.
So you reopened this, Karsten, based on discussion from where?
In some other issues, I think.
Oh, okay.
We find it.
So, you know, I agree with what you said, that I thought we had addressed this and decided to go with array only and literal only. Is there sentiment for reopening this?
I was concerned about the element of surprise if you have a comparison with a structured value, a path on the left.
That's a different question.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking at the discussion on the issue here, and the examples, of course, in Karsten's original post are very helpful. You know, so we're talking about having structured value, or I'm looking at Stefan's comments, pardon me. So are we talking about, so at the current time, if we look at Stefan's examples of array examples, his very first one if you look at the array examples, we're talking about on the left side on before the in. Is that the subject of the issue?
Well, the issue really is about the right-hand side, but
Okay.
yes, if we don't have structured values in our notation at all, then we cannot even write the second array example.
The examples are instructive. I mean, the second one is a different semantic
Yes,
than all
it's
the others.
not the containment, it's being a substring or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the last comment from Stefan agrees with my critique of that. He says he agrees that we shouldn't deal with subsets.
Right. So I mean, the difference between the second and third examples is interesting. So the third example, if you allowed literals on the left-hand side, makes sense. The second one doesn't.
Yeah.
Well, it's false. It makes sense, but it's false.
Yeah, you're correct. You're correct. And then, you know, there's the corner cases about the empty arrays.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's a corner case.
I think if we take out the subset part of the semantics, then the second example becomes false.
Yes.
And 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth example becomes false.
And the fifth
Correct.
and sixth becomes true.
Yeah, the third one's
And
true.
the
Yeah.
seventh as well.
And the last one is also, if you're going to allow that kind of thing, true.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so to me, it really is a question about user requirements, and I'm just seeing 2 comments in the chat from people who actually are users, and it would be great if they
great.
could speak up and tell us whether they need this.
I was looking in the big comparison, and no, there's not much there. So this, this does actually add noticeable complexity. Unless there are voices saying they need this, my instinct is to say, let's just leave it with literals only.
I mean, I agree with that, but I'd go further and say, do we need the in operator at all?
Uh-huh.
I started my micro. Do you hear me now?
Hi,
Yeah.
Stefan.
Hi.
Hello, everybody. Yeah. Okay, you are discussing issue 120.
127.
127. Okay.
Sorry, we've got Daryl in the queue.
Daryl, speak up.
Hey, I'm just going through some of the examples that we use within the overlays proposal that we've been working on for OpenAPI, and I can't think of any scenario where we would want to do in with a structure. We do have scenarios where we would want to be able to use in with a primitive value. So I think allowing in with primitive is a nice compromise, and I do see lots of usage of queries across different scenarios with just in of a primitive, because in with IDs or in with tags, you're looking for is this tag in this list or is this ID in this list? But the structured one, I'm struggling to come up with a scenario for.
Yeah, my feeling is that the literals, matching literals in arrays is pretty easy to specify and not that hard to implement. So I would lean to leaving the in operator in.
Yeah, so we only need a value notation for arrays, which right now doesn't exist. Did I have a slide on that? No. Oh, I did. So that production array literal isn't defined at this point in time, but it should not be too hard to define it. So that would be the action from this issue.
And it doesn't seem that an array literal would screw up or collide with any other syntax or anything like that.
So just to be clear, that scenario with an array literal on the right-hand side would be equivalent to a disjunction.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. It's a bit more compact.
Oh, I see what you're saying, Glenn. So you could say, you could do it as a bunch of ors.
Yeah, so it's just syntactic sugar, really.
Yeah, and I think the important thing is that we actually define the semantics of in terms of the semantics of the equals operator, so we don't repeat ourselves here.
Capture that.
I mean, this isn't the precise issue we're talking about, but my concern with the in operator is when we have a path on each side, and when we have a structured path to a structured value on the left-hand side, and a path to an array containing that structured value on the right-hand side, and then I think it violates the principle of least surprise. But I'm happy to put that on the back burner if this is out of order.
No, it's highly material. I mean, we could say that we could say that unless the left-hand side selects a primitive, the answer is always false.
Yeah, and I think that violates the principle of least surprise in the case I described.
That would also make it hard to actually extend this later.
That leads me back to the examples.
Yeah, so we have a general issue that I think isn't really encapsulated in an issue of its own, but it comes up in other issues. What does it actually mean to have a path somewhere in an expression, a comparison expression, or in a place where a Boolean expression is required? I think we have pretty good consensus for what it means in the Boolean case, but we haven't really discussed what it means in a comparison case. And this would be essentially inheriting that problem that we haven't discussed what a path means in a comparison position.
I mean, we could print the problem by having literals only on the left side of in.
On the left side, that would be weird.
I mean, sorry, primitives only. Yeah, but literals only. No paths on the left side.
Well, that's why you usually have an in. You want to see whether the thing you found somewhere in the document is in a set of values.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
The more interesting question is what happens if it's on the right side? Because then you have a node list, and is that actually the same as an array, or do we extract arrays from these nodes? That's not well defined. And on the left-hand side, of course, if the path is a node list with more than one element, we also have to decide what that means.
Right, but for defining it from the point of view of somebody writing a JSON path, they think in terms of, you know, JSON stuff, not node lists. And you know, these examples here from Stefan are presented that way in terms of JSON.
Yeah, so they don't address the other problem that I was trying to bring up. If you write a JSON path, you might have in your mind that you have nailed down a specific node with the path expression. And then, of course, the semantics are simple. Just extract the value from that node and compare it as we would compare a value on that left-hand side. And if that value is structured, it cannot match anything on the right-hand side because we only have simple values in the array literal. So that's easy. But if the path actually gives you several candidates, what does that mean? But that's a different issue. But it's probably an issue that will inform what we do with this issue.
So Daryl, what would the shape of the queries you might like to do look like? Would you know, would you say $.a.b in, you know, $.c.d kind of thing?
Interestingly, we use this particular scenario in the opposite case. So we have a notion of I want to apply this or merge this change if this literal trait exists in the list of traits associated with the target. So the path is querying into the doc for an array, and we want to know whether a particular literal is in that list. So we would be literal is in list of traits.
So literal is in $.trait list or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, we could.
I mean, I can see both scenarios, but
so suppose the path on the right side of in identifies anything but an array. Then the in does not succeed. Is that right?
yeah, it wouldn't. I wouldn't know how to interpret that.
Karsten, does that make sense?
The interpretation was that the node list resulting from the path actually is converted into an array for this interpretation.
I don't think that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that if I say something is in $.a, if $.a is not an array, not a JSON array, then it doesn't match.
Yeah, so the alternative to that interpretation, which I understand, would be that you actually use a path that delivers a number of nodes in place of an array and go through the node list and see whether you have a match.
So you could say in $.a.star, you mean?
Yeah, something.
Or into a particular property in an object. So you'd path into, there'd be an array of objects you could path into a property on that object, and that would produce your node list that you could then query.
Those are
Well,
two very
what a
different
property
things.
is.
Oh, sorry. What do we call it in JSON world? A key?
So in JSON we have, you know, objects and arrays, and objects
Yep.
have members which have names
Member.
and values.
Okay, so basically selecting a member of an object. If you had an array of objects, you could select a member of an object across an array, which would then create a node list of all of those, the literal values of the member, if the member has a primitive value. So if you had an array of fruit objects, and
Right.
every fruit had a member which was a color, you could pick out all of the blue fruit.
We have a different issue on whether selection actually is possible, because what you describe is a projection where you take an array of objects and extract a single member identified by a name from each of the array elements.
Yeah, okay, so it's the in operator becomes, is there a blue fruit in the list?
Yeah.
Okay, that's.
But we already can do that with a filter expression. So the simple case where we just want to know whether it's there or not doesn't need the in operation. That can be done with the filter expression. And if the filter expression is empty, then you don't have a match. And if the filter expression is non-empty, you do have a match.
Right.
Yeah, which just brings us back to, is in only useful when you have an array of literals, primitives?
I think that would be a good simplification.
I think this is a quite good example regarding issue 122. I think I didn't get it right, Carsten. Your example at dot color in dollar dot dot allowed color. I was thinking about allowed colors. So returning an array of arrays. But this example with a lot of fruits and node list of fruits, and then selecting all blue fruits is a nice example where we are generating an array of object members and then query by the in operator if that color in this case is included or is found in this array.
Assuming you have an in operator, the saying in when you're talking about an array that's part of the JSON data, as opposed to in when you're talking about the results of a query with star in it or something like that, feel like really different things.
Mm-hmm. This requires to turn a node list into an array, and this is the only one in the spec where we demand this.
Well, it's the only place in the spec where we actually handle arrays, because otherwise we are only handling primitive types, so that would not be a surprise. But yeah, we don't have to turn it into an array. We could simply define what it means to have a path as a container.
Yes.
So we can use the array as a useful analogy for defining that, but we don't have to say the path turns into an array, because that has other interesting issues.
Okay, so another point of view. It's okay.
Another way to...
Go ahead.
Yeah, another way to sidestep this issue is the approach I pointed to before in proposal A, which rather than allowing a general path on the right-hand side of in, would have a more restricted path, which would only deliver a node list of maximum size 1. So it'd either be an empty node list, which would yield the value result false, or it'd be a node list with a single value, and then we'd be testing against that single value. Essentially, that gets rid of the options of having dot star and square bracket star and similar things, and dot dot, and so on.
Where the single value could be an array.
Yeah, sure. And that's probably the useful case.
And in doesn't make sense unless it is.
Yeah.
Right.
So let me throw another example at you that I think would not be able to be done if you had that constraint. So I have a JSON document with a list of companies, and each company has a member that is an array of locations where that company is present. So it's an array of objects with like an address with a city property. And I want to do a filter on that set of companies. So it's find me the company that has a location in the city of Detroit. So there I would use a filter, and in the filter condition, I would have an in, and I would want to do in, and I would want to have a path on the right-hand side of the in that digs into the locations and pulls out the cities that each company is present in. And
Well, I think
there may be multiple cities that the company is present in. So if the path on the right-hand side only brings back one, then am I right in understanding that that wouldn't be something we could do?
So at the current time, the in operator is a Boolean, right? It just selects something. A filter expression, assuming you had a city field in your, so if you had a city field in your objects, you could do it with an existing filter expression, fine. If the city field were an array, well,
I'm thinking of nested, right? So you've got one array of companies, and then in each company, you have an array of locations with addresses. So you'd have a filter, but in that filter expression, I presume you can put an in condition in the filter expression.
Yes, so you essentially need a nested query.
Yeah.
You don't need an in at all. You write a filter that gives you the list of companies, and with the nested query, you look into each company whether it actually has the value you are looking for. So you would have a nested query where the query for the location would be nested in the query for the company.
Okay, so you'd use a filter for the second thing too. Okay.
Yeah, so maybe
Yeah,
that's.
I have to look into the filter syntax a bit more. Okay.
That's we need to make examples. So I think that's really what my takeaway here, that we need to make examples that show that we don't really need a path on the right hand side, because these can all be done with filter expressions. And if we have these examples, then I think we can simplify this to just allowing array literal on the right hand side of the container.
at that point, it seems much less valuable, to be honest.
I tend to agree with Carsten's approach to have a nested filter to, in the first step, select the array of cities a company is present, and for each company, for each cities of each company, I will test by the in operator if that city of question is contained.
Okay, so examples would be helpful, as you said. At the moment, based on this discussion, I'm having difficulty seeing where an in operator with just an array literal on the right is interesting and valuable. Do we have use cases for that?
I mean, it becomes a shorthand for or, right? At that point.
Correct. Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion on this. I never having used this construct myself in JSONPath, I just don't have a strong feeling for how useful it really is, and whether it's worth the work to put it into the spec. It sounds like, you know, most of the kinds of things we're talking about can be done with filters. What do you think, editors? Do you want to put it in?
Well, I still think it would be handy, and if we define it in such a way that it really doesn't add complexity, because it's really just a shorthand for this junction of comparisons, then I think it's not a problem putting it in.
Anybody object to that approach?
We are discussing having structured types in comparisons, and on the left-hand side of as a containable, and I also tend to allowing this if it's really straightforward and not very complex with implementations.
So having structured types on the left means you have to define object equality. We haven't done that yet, have we? Or...
Yes. But you can also have a path on the left-hand side.
Yeah. So you have a left on. So if you have a path on the left-hand side, and the path selects an object.
Yes.
And then is that always false, or are we going to try and do object equality in an array that might turn up on the right-hand side?
If you have an array on the right-hand side and exactly this object is in this container, in this array, you will get a match. This would be the consequence of that.
Right. Does anybody have an opinion on that? That strikes me as requiring us to define object equality. We haven't done that yet anywhere else, have we?
No. And I would say it is near trivial to do that. That there are way more complicated parts in, for instance, equality of strings than in the equality of arrays and objects. But yeah, it just adds one additional thing you have to think about. So this is not about in, this is about equals. Equals would allow values on both sides that are structured. And then the next question is, how far do we go with a value notation for these values? So are we able to notate arrays and objects? That's not much harder than defining comparisons. So it's also a relatively inexpensive thing to do. So if we actually have use cases for this, then I would say let's go ahead with it.
Yeah, I'd like to see a use case which can't be satisfied by filters alone. Yeah, I think Daryl may have one.
Sorry, I don't really have guidance to offer here. I'm in favor of keeping the spec as simple as possible, but you know, it does sound like a tractable drafting problem to to define what the literals look like and produce surprise-free results. But it's a substantial piece of work. So I think what Glenn said, I'd want to see use cases.
Yes, use cases for this would be very helpful.
So James, is there a document where we could find those RDAP use cases?
I guess you're talking to James Gold.
Yes, sorry.
He did post a link earlier in the chat. The question is are there any examples, James?
So how is RDAP using JSON path? Is there
So,
document?
yeah, so James posted a link to the draft in
Okay.
question in the chat if you scroll up a little bit, or I
Yep.
can paste it back in.
Yeah, found it.
Redacted fields in the registration data access. Ooh. I'll pretend I know what that means. Are there examples?
Yes.
Yes, there is, around section 3.2.
Can you hear me?
Yes, got it.
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah, there are examples. Pretty much the goal of that draft is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with who is for domain names. RDAP is
All
the
right.
JSON version of who is. And pretty much the need is to be able to explicitly specify what data has been redacted for privacy reasons. And so one approach that was being discussed was to use like placeholder text and that sort of thing. But the decision was within the working group was to create an extension to explicitly specify which of the JSON members have been redacted. So you can tell the difference between it non-existence and redaction. So pretty much there's the use of JSON path to formally define what members have been redacted. Now, there's a combo of whether or not there's redaction of object members or of arrays, because RDAP actually includes the use of oh shit, I forgot the name of it already. Fixed length arrays that include contact data that you can't remove. You just have to clear it. So we need to have the ability to specify positions within an array. So there are examples within the draft of the use of JSON path. So if you review it and take a look, please provide any feedback related to any changes that you're thinking that you're considering in this draft, and whether or not it needs to be fixed in the RDAP redaction draft.
So James, I'm looking at your first example here, just above section 4.
Okay.
And
yeah, I need to get to it myself. Hold on. Sorry about that. All right. Okay.
And the first, so you say, we're looking inside the redacted object, and it's got a path member, and I think it's actually probably got a JSON syntax error in there, but let's not be pedantic. So the first part of it is a filter expression, right? If I read this properly.
I did validate the JSON path. I forget which application we used to validate them, but they were correct at the time.
Yeah, you've got a new line, a return in the middle of your.
Yeah, that's
value.
because of the pagination.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Pardon me. Got it. Pardon me. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, my internal mental JSON path parser isn't that great, but this looks like
Yeah, this
relative-
is not, honestly, there's the name, which we're going to be setting up an IANA registry as well to enable for a more human readable indication of what the redacted member is, but then to have the actual expression language for software to be able to identify elements.
So if you actually applied the JSON path, you would expect to get an empty field back.
It depends. There's two different ways to redact. One is to remove, and the other one is to have it be empty.
Right.
So JCard is the name of the RFC that's used in RDAP to express contact data, and so that uses a heavy dose of fixed length arrays. And so to be able to redact, let's say, I don't know, a telephone number in JCard, it's not removal. It's actually blanking out or having it be a null string.
Got it. These examples are useful, thanks. But on the face of it, it looks to me like they're all filters. We're not really using the in operator.
No. That's what I was asking. I wanted to know whether or not in was applicable. But yeah, we don't have the use of the in operator in this rat.
I think we just run out of use cases in that case.
Yeah. The radical idea would say, let's just take in out. If you want disjunctions, just write a bunch of,
I can't
But,
disagree.
as I said, sorry, did you say you did or didn't disagree?
I can't disagree. Yeah, I agree entirely, but others are pushing for this, so let them speak.
So I think our trait scenario where we need on the right-hand side, a path would need the in. Is that not? Because I don't think you can use an or, because I want to find.
You would use a filter expression. You would use the value that you're looking for as the comparison value in a filter expression. So you just filter out all the instances that have that value. And if that list of instances is empty, then you don't have a match. And if it's non-empty, you have a match.
But how do I do a filter that says this array of strings contains one of these values?
Well, are you talking about literals or are you talking about things you find in the document?
So in the target document, there are objects that have a member which is an array of string literals.
Yes.
And I want to pull back the objects that have an array that contains one of those string literals.
Yeah, so then you have nested filter expressions. You have an inner filter expression that goes through the array and gives you those array entries that actually are what you're looking for.
Okay.
And in the end, you either have a match or you don't have a match. And you use that Boolean to actually control an outer filter that gives you the objects that have this array.
Right.
And that's why I said we really need to create examples, because it's maybe a little bit twisted thinking, but I think it comes in quite handy at the end.
Yeah, I agree. I'm trying to create that in my head and failing. So an example would be useful.
Not made for hits. It's made for editors.
Okay, I'm starting to hear that we are not at the moment convinced that in really adds value as anything more than syntactic sugar, and even at that level, there's not a lot of huge demand for it. Karsten, well, one of us should write that query. I'm going to have to go off and write it to convince myself it works, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, can Can whoever's taking notes make an action point for me?
So Karsten, are you okay with just leaving it out?
What is it?
The in.
I'm okay with that. But I also was trying to accommodate what Stefan said.
Stefan, what do you think?
Regarding accepting structure types on the left-hand side?
No, just the proposal on the table is we don't really need in.
We don't really need the in operator.
Yep. We have a lack of use cases that can't be solved with a filter operator.
Well, the filter operator is useful if the right-hand side comes from the document. If the right-hand side is part of the path expression, then this is just a shorthand for a disjunction, for an or. But it still might be a rather useful shorthand.
Yes, it's correct. You can substitute the in operator through a chain of or expressions. Yes, I think this is correct. So it's you can call it. We can substitute it. So we do not need it. Okay, let's minimalize the spec. It's okay. I'm a minimalist.
And one advantage is that it's relatively easy to add later on because it would be a syntax error in the current spec. So I'm not feeling too uncomfortable with leaving it out because we can always edit later.
Okay, we've invested quite a bit of time in this. Shall we, for the moment, declare that we will simply not use this operator and, note that it's easy to add back in if real demand manifests?
Okay with me?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Okay. Karsten, do you want to move to our next issue?
Yes, we spent the first hour on the first issue and we only have about 36 left. So there is a proposal for an extension that kind of adds X-include to the JSON path processing, and I would like to not do this.
Here, here.
Do we have
So I was going
124,
to say,
right?
speaking as an individual, I think that this should be another part of whatever we do in the extension space.
I'm just looking at this thing to see, are there compelling example use cases in it? Oh my gosh, it's huge.
I also tend to not include this. It adds a lot of complexity to the spec.
There's also a ton of weird corner cases that comes with it.
Yes.
It reminds me an awful lot of XML DTDs. For better or for worse.
Yeah, actually, the main problem with the proposal is that it destroys data transparency. So you no longer can have every JSON string value in your input document because some of these string values suddenly mean something else. And that's a pretty big step.
Okay, is anybody going to speak up and say we want this thing?
Unfortunately, both Greg and the aforementioned author's name is not here, I don't think. So I think what we probably should do is comment on the issue with sort of the consensus from this meeting. I don't think we should include this in the base RFC, but we should leave it open that it should be possible if we support extensions.
Yeah, the fun part is that this can be framed as a preparation step before you apply the actual JSON path processing. So it could be a completely different part of the processing model and wouldn't influence JSON path at all. That doesn't mean you would implement it this way, but it would be defined that way.
Okay, so somebody will take the action item to write a comment on the issue about this. Who can sign up to do that?
I can.
Okay, thank you, Carsten.
Thank you, Carsten.
Next.
Okay, next.
Whoops. What happened? Oh. Yeah, number 123. Is absent equal to absent? So we are now in the realm of comparison semantics. And we have JSON values that we can compare with, currently just primitive values. And we have paths that we can write into the comparison expressions. And these paths, of course, can create an empty node list. And the question is, what happens if you have two paths on both sides of the comparison and both return an empty node list? Does this compare or does it not compare? So
I see the JavaScript behavior is that undefined equals undefined. Ugh.
Yes.
Ever the optimist. I mean, my natural inclination would for the original proposal saying it's false. If I have two things that don't exist, I don't think I'm ever intentionally trying to detect that condition.
Well,
and as who is it? As Daniel Parker writes, in JWay, you get that match can never work.
Unfortunately, we have no undefined data type in JSON, so we can convert it to false, and this is where a lot of arguments came up when you compare existing value false to a not existing value converted to false. Must be true, but I think we need to distinguish these cases, and this is a little problem, but it's no problem to handle these two undefined comparisons like JavaScript not a number, where not a number is not equal not a number. In JavaScript, it's I think we are free to define it. We don't need to handle it like JavaScript, where undefined is equal undefined.
Yeah, I have to say in my mind that this feels like not a number. And the semantic of not a number in any comparison is always false.
Yes.
I'm trying to
Yeah,
understand.
if one wanted the semantics that not finding something on the left-hand side and not finding something on the right-hand side means it's not the same, then we could do something like not a number. But for some reason, I want that semantics. So if I'm comparing two issues and one issue doesn't have a pull request and the other one also doesn't have a pull request, why shouldn't that be the same?
I mean, what you really want is an exists predicate, which really asks the question you're trying to ask.
Yeah, we have that. We have that. So you could
Well, if you have that,
combine.
then that's what you should
We could-
use, and this should not.
We want to compare a missing thing is equal another missing thing, and in fact we are interested in the things themselves, but we can't compare them and discuss the missing of them. It's I'm not quite sure what both arguments have some little truth. I think it's a definition thing. I can't remember how many implementations do equal and how do unequal.
Yeah, so C. Bergmer
result.
actually posted on the issue and saying there's no consensus, not even a majority.
Yeah, I remember.
Basically, naive JavaScript implementations will probably do it.
In the case of JSON path, though, we're using Boolean expressions primarily for filters, right? So
Correct.
It's a case of I want to go and retrieve a bunch of objects that meet a criteria. In the case where we run into does not exist, then we don't know whether it's equal or not equal. So I would have thought that the default behavior is don't return that thing if you can't determine whether or not the condition is met. Which I think is going back to the not a number approach, right?
Indeed. I think that's a fair analogy. So, Karsten, you seem to be the one here who likes this.
Well, first of all, we all agree on mapping the empty node list to a value, and we just disagree on whether it should be undefined or not a number. And I think that's a significant progress, having that agreement. And then we can actually look at examples and use cases to decide the undefined versus not a number thing.
So you had the one use case of, what was it with PRs with no something or other?
Issues and PRs. So you look at
right.
Does the issue have the same PR as some other issue? And if it's not there, then yes, it has the same PR. But if I want to test whether it has a PR at all, then I do what Glenn wrote in the chat. So I would first do an existence test and then do a comparison. Glenn's example had an existence test and a few more existence tests, which is not what I meant. But we have existence tests, so we can code ourselves out of either decision. We just have to decide.
So at the moment, you would prefer undefined-like behavior.
Yes.
And we don't vote. We don't vote in the IETF, but at the moment, I think you're in a minority there.
Yeah. We call that in the rough because we don't count, but it seems most people like not a number better than undefined.
To be more concrete here, if I have two objects and I compare the color from both, but they both have no color, and I ask if A dot color is equals B dot color should be true. I like Carsten's approach. If you really want to know if one of the objects has no color is missing, you can explicitly test that with the existence operator. So at dot color and at dot color equals dollar dot color, for instance.
Yeah, so you whatever we decide, you can always write an existence test that inverts what we decided. So the question really is, which is the default? What happens if you don't further specify it with an existence test? And yeah, my gut feeling is that undefined is the right thing. So two paths that create no nodes are the same for comparison, unless you go ahead and do your own existence check. And I'm hearing other people saying that they would consider that unnatural.
My intuition says that the potential for surprises is greater in the undefined case, but I actually don't have an example to back that up. Should we have a use case contest on this one?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I think our takeaway should, and please, this is just, please disagree if you'd like. My feeling is we should take this to the mailing list and throw some use cases at each other, and use that to guide our final decision.
Yeah, but we have whittled it down to undefined and not a number. So these are the
Correct.
two semantics that we have to decide between, and that's a major progress. Great.
Yes. I
think we just successfully got rid of this problem.
Okay.
Yeah, here we don't have an in operator anymore, and we haven't defined what a regex operator is, so maybe we can skip this one as well. We had a long discussion about truthiness. So what does it mean to use add.foo as a standalone expression? So what does a path expression mean in the context of the expression language? And for comparisons, I think it's pretty clear that we fetch the value that is at that place, and we still have to find out what we do if there is no such value. This is the undefined versus nan problem. But for a Boolean context, we had some discussion on whether we go with one of those truthiness things or turn add.foo in a Boolean context to a pure existence test. And my proposal is, yes, it's an existence test, and there are two reasons for that. One is we don't have any other way to do an existence test, and this is the best and shortest way to do it. And second, it gets rid of the truthiness weirdness that we all love in JavaScript. Is an empty array true or false? Is an empty object true or false? And so on. Is a string with a single zero character in it true or false? Is a string with two zero characters in it true or false? So we wouldn't simply would not open that can of worms.
So just you're in favor of pure existence test,
Yes.
right? Does anybody want to argue for the alternative? Glenn?
No, I fully support that.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure I was reading you correctly.
I like it. I just have one clarification. If foo was present, but a Boolean member that's false, it returns false, even though it's present, right?
No,
No.
I think that's what we're just saying.
But
So if you want to use the value of that path expression, you need to put in a comparison.
So you'd have to say @foo equals
True.
Yes.
true.
You
Yeah.
don't get at the value without using a comparison expression.
Got it. Thank you. Yep.
I sense something like consensus.
Okay, I invite that up again.
Okay. 118.
Yeah, I think that's just the same issue, and probably we can resolve it in the same direction. I like to have issues like this at the end, but yeah. So the question was, do we do any normalization in our comparisons? And it turns out that existing implementations don't, which being a German, I consider to be a bit of a problem. So this may be a place where we want to do some extension sooner or later. But I'm happy with that as the basic behavior. So it would essentially be a byte string comparison if you think in UTF-8, or a code point sequence comparison if you think in Unicode code points. And we can always go ahead and edit normalizing later. And we probably would add a normalizing comparison, but also a normalizing indexing. And that's maybe something that people don't have in mind when they discuss this. So if I'm looking for
I think that if you want normalization, you really, sorry, I chair hat off, but I'm passionate about this one. If you want normalization, you have to ask for it. Otherwise
Yes.
you have.
Yes. Totally agree with that. Because you have to say what kind of normalization.
Exactly. And I think, if you look across the spectrum of IETF RFCs, the practice is very uniform, that don't normalize, just don't.
Well, it's a little bit more subtle, but yeah, you don't just normalize everything upon ingestion. That it was a mistake that should never be done.
By the way, to be pedantic, I think I prefer code point comparison to a byte string comparison, because that, you might be using Java and it's actually UTF-16 inside your code. You don't have to look at bytes, right?
Yeah, so we can phrase it as byte Code
No.
point comparison.
Yeah, phrase it as code point comparison.
And that's not code unit comparison, but code point comparison. Good. I didn't write any texts for this.
109. Let's have a look here. Filtering without child selection.
Yeah, I think that the question was, can you, well, right now a filter expression always goes into something and selects things from that. And can you actually write a filter expression that is not going into something? Which is a bit weird, but there were some examples in that ticket.
I'm going through this trying to find the thing that you can't currently do. Stefan has a nice comment back in July.
Yes, I'm reading my comment.
Oh gosh.
That was exactly my reaction when I made the slides.
I sympathize with you not summarizing this one, Karsten.
Yeah, so my take is this really all works like it should, and you have to work hard to come up with an example where it doesn't work. So maybe the main problem here is that came up after about half of the discussion, that we don't have a good way to get at the key of an entry of the member.
I think I understand the question now again. we do have a problem to select from the argument, take the initial question. There is the argument is an object having 4 members A, B, C, D, and we are not able to query the argument having a member named A or D. It's simply not possible. All we can do is iterate over the argument, and we get the values of each member, but we cannot address the key. So the subject of this issue was, in the end, I think that we need something like add key or a function to address the key of that current selected member or element makes no sense, but the key of a member. But only no, not only for the top level object, but for every object. But Carsten was correctly referring to the possibility to have queries containing queries, but this is not possible at the top level, and this is the problem addressed here, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, once you have selected the value, you have lost the member name. That's really the problem that we have in a nutshell.
For objects deeper in the tree, we can resolve this by having a query inside of a query, but this is not possible for the top level object.
I think having the @key syntax seems like a fairly natural extension to support that.
Well, that means you can get at the key, but then you no longer can get at the value.
Isn't @ the value in this case?
Yes.
That's why it feels kind of there's @ for the value and @key for the key of the value referenced by @.
Yes, and how do you construct something that you actually return?
Assuming it would primarily be used in filters.
That's right. You're looking for something that can be used in filters.
Sorry?
You're looking for something that can be used in filters, right?
Right. So @key equals A.
Yeah, but that still, the filter gives you the value, not the key. So the expression language would have a way of getting at the key, but it doesn't allow you to return the key. So you are essentially in the where clause of a select statement, but you don't get to modify the select part of the select statement.
So that, oh, I see. They want to
Okay.
return the key as well in the node
Yes.
list. Is that what you're saying?
And this is entirely outside the current processing model, which is why it's so puzzling.
It's quite simply as that. You want to query the top level argument for owing a member named A. Does the top level object have a member named A? That's at current not possible.
Well, the querying is possible. You can write down the where, but you cannot write down the select. What you get is the value, not the whole thing.
Was there actually a request in the
Yes.
thread for that? Because I think that the initial request was just being able to filter by the key.
Yeah, I think that was a bit of an unfortunate phrasing.
All we can do is to iterate over all members of the top level object and ask for their values, but we cannot ask for the key. So it's simply not possible to answer the question via a query, does top-level object have a member called named A?
You can answer that question, but you cannot return that member.
How can I answer that question?
Add.a.
No. Add means A, B, C, D. If you ask add.a, you ask for the first member. Do you have are you an object and have a member called A?
Yes.
It's one level deeper.
What you return is one level deeper, but the question that you are answering is the same. I'm trying to explain that this is really a problem with what you return and not a problem with selecting the right place.
The add is during the iteration process will deliver the members A, B, C, and D. And if you query add.a, you ask for each member, do you have a member named A? So it would be true only if A or B or C or D do have a member named A.
Yeah, so
Else
you wouldn't be able to use a filter expression because that has the semantics that you are describing. You just would write add.a. So you cannot undo the diving into the structure that the filter expression does. But I don't think that's actually a problem. The problem here is that people don't want add.a. They want a new object that just has the member A and nothing else. And that kind of projection we can't do.
I'm confused.
This is a very confusing subject.
What shall we do?
Oh, I thought I understood it, but now I realized I don't understand it. Oh.
I think there's a lack of clarity in the issue about what is actually being asked for.
I agree that we need an example chapter in the spec where we do need examples like this and solutions.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the very first statement of the problem.
Yeah.
And I'm having trouble understanding what he wants. What does he want his output to look like?
Yeah, I think we need clarification, really.
He wants to select all sub-objects of the top-level object except the last one. So
right.
You need to identify the objects via their key, but you can't. So
right.
it
I mean,
reduces to the problem to ask the selected objects selected by add for their key.
Right. I mean,
so if you look at,
go ahead.
If you look at the solution he provides, he essentially is doing projection. And again, JSONPath is not doing projection, it's only doing selection. So the where part of an SQL statement, it's not doing the select part. And of course, we could put that in, but that would be a pretty significant addition to the processing model.
I mean, it's at some level, a member of an object is not really a standalone citizen,
No.
where the member includes both the name and the value.
Right.
Yes. But once you have a a member identified by the add operator, you cannot tell its key anymore.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? The at doesn't identify a member; it identifies the value of a member.
Yes.
And so we've lost context.
Yes.
You know, a key function would be magical in a sense, because you're applying key to a value and you're suddenly able to tell the context. So I think it breaks our processing model. I don't think we should support this.
It's interesting because we have the opposite problem in the spec we're doing. We started with JSONPATH, and JSONPATH is optimized for projections and isn't as good at actually pointing at things. And so maybe the answer is you're using the wrong tool for the job if you want to do projections. JSONPATH should focus on selection.
Yeah, I confess to not having thought about this one enough. I'm looking at the various proposed solutions, and none of them are really beautiful.
Yeah, so for people that are as old as I am, JSONPath is XPath and not XSLT.
Now, if you had the at key syntax, that would allow you to do selections based on what the key of this value was. So it's still in the spirit of I'm selecting things, not projecting things.
Yeah.
It just doesn't support the projection scenario.
You would go up in the hierarchy, which we currently
Yeah.
don't. But that's a smaller change to the processing model than actually adding protection.
At key
Yeah.
does, I mean, you know, it's as if each member value had a sort of a pseudo attribute, a pseudo member of itself called key that points back to its parent, right? It's sort of like the dot dot on.
Yep, exactly. But again, I think, you know, we should probably hunt for examples as to specific cases where that's absolutely needed, because it is only a problem at the root, right? And maybe there aren't that many scenarios where it's needed.
Well, the lack of projection is a problem everywhere. So I think I
Sure.
could make examples that expose this problem at other places in the root.
But I think trying to bring projection capabilities in as well is probably a much bigger issue.
True.
So where are we coming in on? I think we acknowledge the issue. The issue is a real issue. So first of all, are we interested in trying to solve it? And I'm not hearing a lot of eagerness to try and solve this one, absent some more compelling use cases.
It's a fact that this issue did come not very often in the past, so it's not a very important issue, I think. I tried mentally to put this object in the first comment one level deeper, and even then you cannot exclude the D member only in that case where you name explicitly the other members, but this is not practically with big objects, I think. So it's okay, I agree if we don't care much about this issue.
So should we say provisionally that for the moment we are going to acknowledge but not address this issue and encourage anybody who cares to bring a convincing use case?
Yes.
So I write won't fix.
Yeah, I think even with a convincing use case, I wouldn't want to put it in necessarily because I think it's probably out of scope.
It's a significant extension of the processing model.
Yeah, and I don't think we necessarily want to address all use cases.
Okay. Got any more?
Yeah, we're on slide 14 of 37. I think we just closed this. Please look at the last pull request that was merged, but I don't think we need to discuss this here. I think we have consensus here. So this was about the order of results. And we are saying this is pre-order, but acknowledging that objects are unordered in JSON, so there is non-determinism. And there are some better words in that pull request that should be explaining this.
Seems like the only sensible thing to do. Yep.
Yeah. This is pagination, which I think is a good thing, but maybe outside of JSON path. So typically when I would write a query, I would then tell the API, oh, by the way, only give me the first 20 hits. That I would see that in the API, but of course there are cases conceivable where you want to have pagination inside a JSON path expression. I'm just having a hard time thinking of such cases.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point is that JSON path should be declarative, right? And it specifies what the output is, not how you access it.
Well, giving a number, I want 20 of those, that's still rather declarative. So I'm not sure that is a good argument, but I think a good argument is that this is something that an API usually does.
I'm not sure I'm sold on the scenario of paging, but I think the scenario of just being able to say, select object, but only give me back 5 of them, I think might be a valuable use case. Because I may want to present those on a UI. I may be only interested in getting some sample set of data to play around with. There may be 1,000 objects in the target document, but I only need a few in order to achieve my goal. And rather than returning the full result and then throwing the rest away, if we can save effort where the selection mechanism only has to find a few, I could see value there.
Can you not do that with our slice?
very possibly. Once again, showing my ignorance on the spec.
Well, a slice only applies to arrays, doesn't it? Whereas we're talking here about a node list.
That's true. Mm.
I think we need to decide if we want to allow or support some kind of post-processing of the results of a query, which I would suggest that this happens here, or to extend the query capabilities to do exactly that. So return only the last 5 or the first 5 or something in somewhere in the middle, 5 elements of the result node list. It's hard to do, but it would return again a node list which subsequent queries would be possible theoretically.
But there currently isn't any ordering capabilities in the results, right? In the JSON path expression. So I don't know whether saying first or last or middle actually adds any value. I think it's purely just a limit capability that is the useful thing.
Well, yeah, I'm coming down on the side of Karsten here. Is this feels like an API problem, not a you know, our title is expressions, you know, expressions for JSON, and this doesn't feel like part of the expression.
Seems fair.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And we probably also can come up with a way to tag this information on to a JSON path if people find that convenient. So we have in SQL, we have limit, we have offset, we have order by, which is pretty important if you only want to have a limited number of results. So that would need to be part of that extension.
But I'm cognizant of time because we've got only about 7 minutes left. And Glenn, you said you wanted to cover regular expressions, which is still a handful of slides down. Is that something we might want to cover and then leave a couple more minutes to wrap up and perhaps discuss when we might have our next meeting, if we are having an interim? Cool.
So, you know, looking at Karsten's slide here, is the first option open to us? Is there a regular expression flavor that we could select?
There are 2.
I'm trying to swap in this discussion. We didn't like XSD for some reason.
Well, we didn't like one aspect of XSD, so we essentially, if we do XSD, this means subsetting. Character subtraction is a non-starter in most implementations.
I guess my concern is that regular expression syntax and semantics seems like an orthogonal concern to JSON path. We ought to be able to mix and match. So, you know, I'd prefer to not to have to freeze or pick a particular regular expression syntax in the standard, but to allow you to mix and match it. So you could then have JSON path over XSD or JSON path over RE2 or whatever regular expression language you choose. It obviously limits interoperation, but I think it's more tractable for standard.
Yeah, but limits operation is a big deal.
Okay.
Yeah,
I would hope that the same JSON path applied to the same argument would produce the same result modulo ordering consistently.
Yeah, I mean, what I had in mind was that JSON path over, for instance, RE2 would interoperate perfectly with JSON path over RE2, but not necessarily perfectly with JSON path over XSD.
Well, first of all, regular expressions are a mathematical concept that is expressed in these various forms of real-world regular expressions. And some of them are going pretty far away from the concept of regular expressions, like PCIe and ECMAScript that was built from PCIe. And some are rather close, so you can actually use the implementation of a regular language to implement this. So that's, for instance, true for the XSD regular expressions. So by defining a subset that is essentially within the field of Chomsky type 3 languages, the mathematical form of regular expressions, we could have something that can be mapped to just about any flavor that is out there. But that's a piece of work that has to be done. I have started it in this iRegex document, but it probably needs a couple of more iterations before it's ready for consumption.
And implementers, you know, aren't, I suspect, in most cases going to be thinking about the Chomsky type. They're going to be thinking about what library can I use? Because, you know, I don't think a JSON path implementer should have to also implement regular expressions. They should be able to say regf.match.
Yeah, that was my concern, really. If you have to build up a mapping to your whatever your language library is for regular expressions and do a mapping of iRegXP or whatever, then it puts a big burden on the implementer.
I will say that most of the people I interact with who are interested in working with JSON Path are also in parallel working with JSON schema. And so they've picked their particular flavor, and there would be value, at least to that part of the audience, to doing something very similar to JSON schema.
What flavor is that?
They've referenced ECMA 262, and then they have a recommendation of sticking to a subset.
So iRegex might be the way to go for JSON schema and for JSON path also.
Well, so there's the possibility of looking at trying to adopt what JSON schema did. There's the possibility of subsetting W3XSD. There's a possibility of writing our own. So we have three options on the table. Of the various things before us, this is the one that has the greatest potential to delay the product of this working group by years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perhaps we should take this as a discussion to the list and present those three options.
Well, could we also include my option, which was to factor out the regular expression language.
Yep.
And realistically, there's 5 options. The other one is don't have them.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Shall we leave that as an action point to take to list?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Okay, we are out of time, and I have to go do some things. Anything else
Yep.
we can squeeze in?
Yes, the one thing that we do need to discuss is when our next meeting is. IETF113 is happening in mid-March, as I understand it. And I also understand that it won't be in Bangkok this time, but I'm not certain of that. Should we be scheduling an interim meeting before then, say in January or February after New Year?
If we want to finish this, we should have one about
Yes.
once every month.
Okay.
Yeah, we're
Perhaps
into
it's too
November,
early
and-
for. Sorry, go on.
Let's try for January.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
I think we can put a doodle poll to the mailing list.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, everybody. This has been super constructive, and I think we've pushed this thing a little further uphill. And I'm optimistic that we have a finish line in sight if we can figure out what to do with Regex.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. It was great.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I have to be rude and run away right now. Bye.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.